Hi, if we could all take our seats, please. Hi, if everybody could take their seats, please. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dana Gluck, and I am the Executive Director of Friends of Bezalel USA. We are so grateful to be here tonight at the Jewish Museum amongst such good friends and allies to speak about the role of art, design, and education in Israel right now. It is especially nourishing to be here tonight at the Jewish Museum, where I know we all feel so at home. It is my pleasure to welcome to the stage James S. Snyder, the Helen Menschel Goldsmith Director of the Jewish Museum, and Adi Stern, President of Bezalel Academy of Arts and Design, Jerusalem.
So welcome to all of you. It's actually a pleasure to have all of you here. You are here at the Jewish Museum, but of course you're here for Bezalel. And we all know that Bezalel has a long history. I'm proud actually to say that I have a little bit of a long personal history with Bezalel, having had the privilege to be on its board for the many years that Tina and I were in Jerusalem when I was at the Israel Museum. Adi Stern and I have a very long history together. Actually, when he was head of visual and environmental studies, visual communications at Bezalel, I invited him to lunch at the renewed Israel Museum to try to encourage him to come to be our curator of design and architecture. He declined. Subsequently, I was on the search committee when we chose him to be appointed as the president of Bezalel. And I actually am proud to say I also have a long history with Elon Kaftal, who's sitting over there. He refused to sit in the front row, who has been your leader for a very, very long time. So when I was asked if you all might gather here this evening, of course, it was a pleasure to say yes. And really, this is a very robust group. We're going to talk a lot about October 7, and one thing that I have to say, it's difficult to see silver linings there, but we have had many events in this ballroom auditorium in these last several months, and we always have a robust turnout, and it really means a great deal to us. And if I can say this before we sort of shift into our focus on Bezalel, we did say that if you were to come, we wanted you to stop on the third floor first to see Zoya Cherkasky's drawings of October 7, which she produced in the weeks following October 7. And so many of you have come up to me to say how moved you've been by looking at that installation. And if it's okay, I just want to take a moment to reflect on it. I stopped there myself before coming into the auditorium, and there were so many of you in there. Really, it's quite moving. It's quite touching. I know Zoya from almost 10 years ago when we started to talk to her about doing an exhibition of her work, which we did at the Israel Museum in 2017. And we've followed her work very closely since then. And right after October 7, when she started producing these drawings, I'm sure you all know this, on October 8, she took her 6-year-old daughter and some colored pencils and some watercolors and 11 by 17-inch paper and went off to Berlin. And while she was in Berlin, she produced all of those drawings over the subsequent weeks. And I saw some of them on Instagram. And Darcy Alexander, our chief curator, who's also here, also was seeing them. And we realized very quickly, as part of our thinking about what our response to October 7 would be, that we wanted and needed to show that work. And very quickly, we were able to get the permission from Zoya and from her gallery here in New York to be the first location anywhere to present this work. We did it rather quickly. We put it up in mid-December. We'll speak more about this later, but you know that there's been such a huge pushback from the art community, from the art world here in the US and everywhere about being responsive in a sympathetic way to the tragedy of October 7. And yet our installation, when it went up in December, has benefited only from a very endorsing response from the media broadly, but particularly from the art media. And it's been very gratifying to us to know that doing what we have done has elicited such a response. It's been quite moving, and I just want to thank the many of you who've come up to me to tell me how moved you were seeing that work this evening, that it means a lot to me to hear this from you. So many things come together this evening, and I only want to begin there. Really, October 7 was and will for a long time be a life-changing moment for all of us. For those of us who are old enough to remember 9/11, I'm not comparing these two moments, but there is this notion of before and after. The world felt one way before 9/11. It felt another way immediately after. And this was the same phenomenon with October 7. And you know, you can think of many things. Many of us saw Golda, the movie, before October 7 and felt one way about it. And if you saw it after October 7, you thought very differently. And you know, I had just been appointed and was starting a few weeks after October 7 here at the Jewish Museum. And I realized in those weeks that we would need to absorb and address what the role and responsibility of art and culture as disciplines would be to that life-changing moment, and what museums and art schools would need to think about and to do in response to that moment. You know, for me, and some of you know me, the start of my tenure at the Jewish Museum is the most recent moment in a long museum world trajectory. It started at MoMA, then to the Israel Museum, and then here 3 months ago. And again, those of you who know me know that I'm a dyed-in-the-wool modernist. All I ever thought about at MoMA was 1850 and later. What happened in the middle of the 19th century that enabled the invention of a vocabulary for modernism, which continues to unfold today? And then I went to the Israel Museum, and the story was totally different. It's like I never thought about the 1.5 million years of the trajectory of creative making that preceded 1850. And I thought I was well educated, but honestly, I never thought about that. So I lifted that crust, and there you have 1.5 million years. You've all been to the Israel Museum, right? Those of you who haven't, feel ashamed and don't raise your hands. But what I really learned from that experience is this notion of looking at 1.5 million years of material culture that's connected across that long timeline and all around the world, and it's this notion that all things connect. And you know, when I came here, I realized that I was looking, it's as if you took that notion of universality and turned it the other way. And here we are at the Jewish Museum, and what are we about? We're about 3,500 years of the material cultural legacy of a culture wandering in the global diaspora and relating to all the cultures around it, no matter when or where. And our focus and our responsibility is to shepherd the history of that culture over 3,500 years. And the notion that it started in a certain place, which is going to get us to Jerusalem, and then indeed did meander and continues to meander. And it's not just our culture. Now it's many cultures that are having that same experience. And part of what we need to think about and be responsible for here is to show the way for how you look at those diasporatic cultures as they move around the globe. And you know, before October 7, we in the museum world and also in the art education world needed to be thinking about how we were, what our responsibility was, and how we could be leaders in the post-COVID era and in a kind of new virtual age and in an age of remote, of a life which becomes and can be remote rather than immediate. And we live in an increasingly contentious world. We have for a while. We know that, and the real question there is what can art and culture do to create a kind of diplomacy, a kind of activism for the good of the world? And this is, for me, a museum focus, and for Adi, it's the focus in art education, and it's what art schools are about. And you know, if you look at this moment of October 7 and the Middle East as a flashpoint for that moment, for us in the museum world, almost immediately, here and elsewhere, we needed to think about how we were supposed to respond to that moment. For many in the museum world, it became a matter of remaining silent. And for us, it couldn't be that way. Perhaps because of being the Jewish Museum, our focus had to be different. It had to be special. Those of you who are involved with us know that on my first day, on November 7, we sent out a message condemning brutality, calling for the restoration of humanism, which is the core of our being, and highlighting that we exist to be custodians of the history of material culture of the Jewish world, and we would need to continue to do that by taking action. And for us, that action meant, and this is a program in really that's moving forward rapidly, workshops for our staff for education and engagement, public talks. We did one last night with Ruby Namdar. I hope many of you know him, and a Persian heritage Israeli writer living and working in New York, whose prose is magnificent. He lives and works here, but he writes in Hebrew. And his book, The Ruined House, is one that I hope many of you have read, and we're continuing that series. And we started our program of giving artists the opportunity to show work responding to the tragedy of this moment, but also examples taken from history. Because what you saw looking at Zoya Cherkassky's work is of this moment. But artists, creative makers, many of whom have grown and will continue to grow at Bezalel, are really about responding to moments like this. And you know, you look at Dada and Surrealism that came out of World War I, you look at abstraction that came out of World War II, and at this very moment, if you look at Zoya Cherkassky, this work has come out of October 7. So this really brings us to a focus on the meaning of art education, and particularly think about it for a moment. This guy is the president of Bezalel in Jerusalem. There can't be a place that could and should resonate more with the moment and responsibility arising from that moment than what Bezalel is in a position to do now. So this brings us to you. And it brings us to talking to Adi about the experience now of Bezalel. And last point, it's an amazing thing that out of COVID, you succeeded in moving Bezalel from the mountain to the center of town. You became a point of centrality in Jerusalem for plenty of reasons having to do not with October 7. And I want you to start by talking about the power and the impact of that move pre-October 7 and now.
Good evening. I will answer your question, but before that, with your permission, I want to say two things. First is thank you for having us here. Bezalel, James, and the Jewish Museum, thank you. And thank you all for coming and being here with us. It is, I assume you've heard it many times, but it is super important to feel that we have friends and supporters overseas, and solidarity is a word, but it means a lot for us. The second thing I want to say is that I do want to acknowledge and remind all of us, and I think it should be said, and I don't want to ruin the event, but we need to remember that war is still going on. It's not post anything. It's still going on the ground. Our soldiers are there. Our students are there. We have 350 students in the military right now. And we must think about the wounded, all who were affected by the war, the hostages, of course. You might have heard the news today, the horrific news, and everyone else who were harmed and affected. And we need to keep this in mind. This is still still happening, and it's a bit of a parallel universe. It's all over in Israel and also here. We're sitting here, we're drinking wine, we talk about things, but this is still going on, and we need to remember that. And maybe I'll end with this just quote. People are asking, is everything okay? And the answer is no, nothing is okay. Really, nothing is okay. So we're trying to cope, we're trying to struggle, we're doing our best, and maybe I'll jump to the end. We must be hopeful. I am hopeful. I'm trying to be optimistic, but I thought we need to set this as a basis to our conversation. Now back to your question.
And you shouldn't apologize for
No,
what
I'm
you
not
just said. It's very important that you said what you said. And the notion of activism through creative making, through producing art, through culture that is the context for that, can and needs to be a path to a brighter time beyond where we are. And it needs to be the antidote to the polarization and politicization that we're seeing everywhere now. And this is actually why what you do is so meaningful.
Yeah, thank you. We'll go back to this later, I think, to society in Israel at large before October 7th and now. But back to your question, and prior to the war, maybe I'll say just one sentence about the school, because I don't know if everyone, probably most of you know, but I will say just that Bezalel is the oldest kind of cultural institution in Israel. It was established 1906, which means that in 2 years we are celebrating 120 years, which is unheard of in the state of Israel. And so it's the oldest institution. It's the largest art and design school in the country. And maybe I'll say shamelessly that I think it's the most influential for the last, again, 120 years. And we teach more or less all the disciplines of art and design and architecture. And we've moved, as James said, we had most of our activity happening on Mount Scopus until roughly a year ago. And we've relocated to a brand new campus, which is a state-of-the-art facility, an amazing new building in the very center of town. It's in what's called the Russian compound, right behind City Hall. But what's really important about this new campus is both the architecture, which is amazing, and the building was designed by Sana architects from Tokyo, Pritzker Prize winners, but moreover, it's the location. It's being in the very center of town. It's really the beating heart of the city. It's in between the different communities, and if you know, and I assume most of you know Jerusalem, it's a tough city. It has a lot of different communities, and we are right in the center, right? Very close to the old city, the Palestinian part of the city, very close to Mea Shearim, the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, next to Musrara and to other neighborhoods. And being there is a crucial part of our mission. And this will relate to other things we'll talk about, I suspect. But being in the center of town is super important for us. We see Jerusalem as part of our mission. It's not by coincidence that we are there. It's not technical that we are there. We are part of the city. We want to give, to contribute to the community, to the city, and we want to benefit from being in the city. And I believe that any art school should be in the city center, should be part of the community, part of the city, working with the people of Jerusalem, with and for the people of Jerusalem, and that's what we're trying to do. We just moved in. We are fully operational since end of March, so it's less than a year. We had a very successful, beautiful first semester on campus, and then in September, around Rosh Hashanah, in many gatherings with the staff and faculty, and I told everyone that we went through a few very challenging years because we had to go through COVID, and then the move of the campus, which was a big challenge, and then this next academic year will be calm and normal and routine, and then October 7th came. So I was wrong.
You know, if you think of moments of before and after, I did have the privilege to be present for the opening of Bezalel in March a year ago, and it really was magnificent. Elon, you remember it well. A number of you were there. It was pretty astonishing. These folks stared down COVID and accomplished the completion of that project, and it really was remarkable and exhilarating to be there. And you know, Bezalel was okay up there on the mountain, but moving it to the middle of town seemed unbelievably vital. And you know, October 7 happened, and 10 days later was supposed to be the opening of the new National Library, which could not happen. And if you want to think of momentous before and after moments in Jerusalem, just pair those two. But Adi, I want you to dwell a little more on that first year, that first half year really, in the middle of town before October 7, and how it felt to bring Bezalel to the center, and how students felt, and what their response was to being at the heartbeat of the city.
So I should be honest. Frankly, it was, and it's still really the beginning. I mean, it's a huge change for the school, for the community. Everything has changed. As they say, I used to tell people, it's not that we're moving the cheese, we're moving all the cheese to everyone at a single moment. So it was a very big change, and we're still in this. I mean, I hope that the first semester that was supposed to start at the end of October will be the semester when everything will settle down, and obviously it didn't happen. But nevertheless, I think being in the city center is wonderful. It's very new for us. I should have mentioned that the building, some of you might have seen it, is extremely transparent. It's very, very transparent. And the idea is to be open to the community, to be transparent to the community in the literal sense. And it means that people go around the campus, pass by, and they can look inside, they can look and wonder what is it like an art school or a fashion design studio or a sculpture studio, etc., etc. And people come into the school. Welcoming the community is very important for us, and it didn't happen at all on Mount Scopus. No one came to Mount Scopus. Now it's the other way around. It's really the opposite. And people come in, they're curious. They come to the library. They come to the cafeteria. They see the shows, and it's a very big difference in terms of the nature of the school. I think we started to see the students going out more, producing work outside, installing installations and works on the streets around us. And maybe it's interesting to say that when we were on Mount Scopus, and also if you think on about all the other academic campuses, like the university campuses in Israel. They're all on the outskirts. They're all fenced with a big fence, like they're different territory. And we are the other way around. We are, in a way, we became a part of the city. The gap or the barrier now between Bezalel, the art school, and the city, the citizens of the residents of the city, the barrier is just it's the thickness of the glass. It's nothing. You step one step outside, you're in the city, and then you go back, you're at Bezalel. So I think in many respects it's still early to say, but it is different. It is very different, and we like it, I think.
You know, I want you to talk next about how you feel the students have been affected and how you see that in their coming back since October 7th. But I do have to say, listening to you talk about the campus now, it makes me realize the campus on Mount Scopus was about opacity, and the campus in the Russian compound is about transparency. With all due respect to the beauty of the design of Sana, the building almost doesn't exist. There's a transparency there, and it's like a beehive of many levels of creative making students working in all kinds of disciplines. And as you move around the campus, you just see this beehive of activity.
It's like a factory. It's an art factory, and it's like someone said that it's the design of Sana was done in such a way that they've designed the floor plans, and that's it. So the building has no facades, so to speak. It's all transparent. And someone else said, I suspect it was you, said there's amazing architecture, but where's the building? It kind of disappears as it's so transparent. Yeah, but I did want to give you another example in regard to the connection with the community, which brings us in a way already to after October 7th. One of the things that we did right after, when a few days after the massacre, I started to hear about different initiatives coming up from bottom up, from the community, from students, from faculty, from alums, with different ideas because people wanted to do something, to be active, to contribute in some way, to help. So we had many different initiatives. I can talk about it later, but one of them was basically a sewing factory, because we have a fashion design department, so we have a big hall, like this size of a hall, full of sewing machines, and it started to work as a sewing factory for the army, for the soldiers, working day and night, 40 people sewing all the time, students, faculty, alums, and members of the community. And we had people coming from all over the city, people, men and women who know how to operate the sewing machine, and they came in every day, like coming to work, sitting with our students and sewing kits and pouches and gear for the army, for the soldiers. And it was beautiful to see. It was really the vision that came true, I mean, under tragic circumstances, but nevertheless, the idea of, no one could have believed or think about the possibility of a lady, an 80 years old woman from Mea Shearim, ultra-Orthodox Jewish, coming every single morning into Bezalel, into the art school, sitting with students and working together. So this was, in a way, a beautiful embodiment of our vision, so to speak. Yeah.
And you know, it's actually really interesting to hear you say this, because the idea of art making, you know, people see it as a kind of distant thing, a foreign thing, an unknown thing. And being in the center of town in Jerusalem and looking up at Mount Scopus, you wouldn't think of it as a place that you would want to enter or engage with. But what you're describing now is very touching, because a subject I want us to discuss is the meaning of activism through art. And, you know, in a way, you're talking about communal activism, engaging with activism through art. And so it's giving people who are around you, but for whom art school and the campus of an art school might be something not just unfamiliar, but something of no interest. But here you had embrace there between them.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, in general, this is one of our objectives, our goals, moving into the city, or maybe the main goal, moving into the city center. Again, as I said, it's just a beginning. And while doing all those initiatives, that they were very varied. I mean, we started with running many workshops in the hotels in Jerusalem and around Jerusalem for the evacuees, for kids, for elderly, for everyone. Workshops in ceramics, in arts, etc. And then it moved to many different other projects. Some were very professional, like very design, industrial design and other design projects, like creating learning spaces, temporary learning spaces for, again, for the evacuees. So just imagine you have to design and build and erect a learning space, a school, basically, for kids in 3 days within a hotel. So how do you do that? It's an interesting design challenge, so to speak. Anyway, we did that. We did the sewing factory. There were many projects about like campaigns for the hostages, art installations in the school, on the facade of the school, around the school. And basically in all those projects, you had community members coming in and participating. So this is very new for us. I do want to say one more thing, maybe. It's, we're talking about the role, right? The role of art and design at this time in Israel, and it's not, in a way, it's wrong to say this in those days in Israel. We should say during wartime. What is the role of art and design in such times? And the easy answer would be none, right? It's all about essential needs. It's all about the necessary needs. It's about food. It's about hospitals. It's about the army. They say, right, when the cannons are heard, the muses are silent, and we don't agree, of course. But it's this is the easy answer. But I think, in fact, the better answer would be that art and design and art education, even more, is more important than ever right now in Israel, more important than ever. And I think we have so much to give to the community on so many different levels. And we should keep in mind that what we do is not only art. Of course, fine arts is very important, but it's also all the design disciplines, so the way graphic designers or industrial designers or architects can contribute to Israeli society right now is endless. I've been thinking about it, and one would say, so are those disciplines are not essential? Are they? You can live without them? Well, I think we will agree that they are essential. They are a must, and they're not replaceable, so to speak. And I think art is what enables us to think, to process, to contemplate, to mediate, and maybe just to give a few examples. These are not things that necessarily happened, but I've been thinking about this question, this title of this talk, and think about perhaps a girl who reads, or her parents are reading her a children's book, and the illustrations in the book, those are the images that help her cope and understand and think about what happened, process what happened, or think about, this is very obvious, but think about all those evacuees and the residents of the kibbutzim and the cities around Gaza, in the Gaza envelope. When they will go back to the cities and the kibbutzim, who knows where this will happen, but at the moment they'll be back, or actually before they'll be back, to what extent or what is the weight and the significance and the importance of the architecture concepts and the design concepts of rebuilding those areas? And it's not only technical, physical, material issues, it's psychological issues, it's how do you build a community again. And this is, I mean, I don't think I can overestimate the importance of those design processes, thinking about this immense challenge. And maybe just to end, to give one more example, is thinking about the arts. I was just thinking about it. It's a kind of a tiny, small incident, but I was thinking about someone looking at the work of art, like Zoya's work or other works, and this is what enables him or her to shed a tear, to start crying, to open his or her heart, to liberate this immense, horrific weight that we have on us. And is this a lifesaver? I don't know, but maybe it's a soul saver, right?
You know, let's step back a few steps, because I want to come back to this. But I saw on your website in the time after October 7, and you've already described these first actions, the sort of sewing factory and working in the hotels for the refugees. But there were also some very impressive art actions taken by students and made by students, and you posted all of these. Give us a few examples of those, because those were immediate responses. Those weren't the reflective responses that would follow, and I want to talk about that. But some of these were quite moving. Visually, they were quite moving when I saw them just online.
Well, I don't know what you referred to, but I can describe a few. There were, as I mentioned, there were few campaigns, mostly coming from the visual communication department. One was a campaign of yellow stickers, just simply saying, bring them home now. And this is, I don't know if you've been to Israel since the war broke, but if you've been, you probably saw it. It's spread all around the country. So it is meant to be stuck to shop windows. And you go in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv or wherever I go, I see them all around, and it's a simple action, but it's very powerful. There were other projects. We've hosted some artists, namely or mostly, most importantly, it was a work by Michal Rovner, who was shown on the facade of the school. Again, it's a very long, transparent facade, and we took all the length of the building, placing, positioning, I think it was like 40 huge screens or 50 or something like that. In the beginning, it was the faces and the images of the hostages, and then at some point, Michal offered us or enabled us to use her work, and it was extremely powerful installation. Then it was shown here at Times Square and other places, and there were more and more other such
and
projects.
It began with you, and it was telegraphed globally.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, even before we opened Zoya's installation, we did put a work of Michal Rovner up in the lobby, which you can see on your way out, one of her early moving works about global migration. And you all know, of course, that she's an alumna of Bezalel. For a little while, I kept saying that Zoya Cherkassky was an alumna of Bezalel, and Adi said, you really have to stop saying that. It's not true. Oh, well. But
we can adopt her.
But these were very moving, and they were immediate responses. Those were art actions. And I want you to talk a bit now. What are students saying now that they're back and they're working again and they're being reflective? Are they concerned that what they want their focus to be in creative making isn't going to be relevant in the future, or do they feel they want to embrace it even more?
Well, the truth is I don't know. I mean, again, it's too early. They just came back. The moment they came back was really a moment of hope, because the school was closed for two months or so. The huge building was empty, and the day they came back was a moment really of hope, and it was beautiful to see them coming back. We were very concerned with whether they will come back, all of them, Jews and Arabs. We didn't know, and there were a lot of rumors and thoughts about it, and eventually every single one came back, and it's a big. I'm hesitating, but I will say it's a big success for us. I think it shows the strength of the community and the fact that they feel at home. They wanted to come back. They wanted life, they wanted routine, they wanted to come back to creating, to working together. And it's not that there is no tension in the air. As I said before, the war is still going on, and everyone thinks about it. But it's I think they wanted this, and it's really a ray of light, so to speak. And
You know, you've touched on something very important. In Tina's and my 22 years in Jerusalem, what moved me hugely was the way that the Palestinian community and the Israeli community lived together in Jerusalem side by side. And I asked Adi, as students were coming back, if the Palestinian students were reluctant to return. And as he's just described, they may have had some anxiety, but they have returned. And you know, this notion that you don't have to love one another, but you can learn how to engage with one another. And you know, in our museum world, this notion of engagement, education, just simply talking and not being about polarized attitudes and aggression and disconnect. And art and education are really, in the cultural community, are really about this. And it was very moving to hear that this Palestinian community of students, who are a very important part of Bezalel, indeed have returned.
I think it's a bit maybe ambitious or pretentious to say that it's a paradise or, you know, an oasis, but maybe it's a bit of an ex-territory, and it's a space where people can, it's a shared space. It's a really a shared space where people can feel at home. You know, we went through, all of you I assume know that we went through a very tough year before October 7th. Israeli society is torn completely and divided. And we went, I mean, myself, I went demonstrating every single weekend to express our opposition to the attempt to change the regime, to change the judiciary system. And during this year, we were looking for the right way as an institution, as the leadership of an institution, to express our values. And normally, I don't speak politics as a president of the institution, because I think that one of our main values is pluralism, and we like the fact that we have students from all over the country, and Jews and Arabs and secular and religious, and they have different views, and it's great. It's the right way to do it, and I need to remember that I represent all of them, and my own personal position or standpoint is not that important. Nevertheless, during that time, I felt, or we felt, or all the leadership, that this was not about politics. This was about trying to change the country completely, and we had to express our view. And one of the things was to say, those are our values. It's very simple. It's very clear. It's pluralism. It's humanism. You've mentioned humanism. It's about human dignity. It's about equality, which was not and still not obvious enough in Israel, that every single one, every human being is equal. And it's about the freedom of expression, artistic expression, and the freedom of speech. And those four, or more or less four values, are basic values. Any art school in the world or any academic institution in the world probably will sign on or will stick to those values. Nevertheless, during that year, it was important to say that loud and clear. And I'm mentioning this because I want to believe that this is one of the things that made this community, the Bezalel community, a community that what it is. It's a shared space, and people from all walks of life, whether they come from Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or the settlements, or they Jewish or Arab, they feel at home. And I will tell you one thing, lastly on this, that I heard just last week, chair of one of our departments told me that she had a conversation with a student, and it was a very tough one. The student is a Palestinian Christian, and she said that to her professor, to the chair, she said that she no longer sees herself living in Israel. because as a Christian, the Palestinian Muslims don't like her. For the Jews, she's an Arab, but the only place where she feels at home and she feels she can be herself is Bezalel. So for me, it was very moving, and it was a moment, again, a moment of hope.
You know what you're saying just now is hugely moving, and we speak alike. These are the attitudes of the museum world. I often have to say I don't talk politics, and in fact, what we're really doing is looking through a cultural lens at the same landscape, but where there's potential for progress, which often political discourse or lack of discourse can achieve. You know, I think let's take a few questions now, if you have some questions, because your last statement was so eloquent. I think we can stop and hear from a few of you. Yes?
Sorry, what was the reaction from?
Yeah, so you put that sign on the wall.
Just showed him the sign.
Mhm.
It says,
Yeah.
based on principles of human dignity, equality, pluralism, and freedom of thought, speech, and creative expression. That was on your front door.
That was on, this is still on our front door, and it's, I should mention that it's trilingual, so it's Hebrew, Arabic, and English. And the question was?
What were the reactions?
I think the reactions were good. I mean, all across the board, from students, faculty, people go around. I do see sometimes people, passers by, you know, Jerusalem citizens, civilians, looking at this in a kind of an awkward way, mostly maybe Haredim, ultra-Orthodox Jews. But it's for us, it's the right way to do it. I mean, it's our values. We used to, I mean, we think about it a bit like, it's the rules of the house. You have to believe in those rules if you want to come in. If you don't believe in those values, then please don't come in. And those, in my view at least, they're not, because in Israel, sometimes some people think that these are like left-wing, lefties values. And for me, those are universal values. They're not left or right. We have to stick to those values. We did have quite a few issues, and we still have every once in a while, with politicians. With a lot of noise online, on social media. But with our community, I think everyone respected this and was happy to see this on the front door.
You know, in the new age of social media, people aren't thoughtful. They hear something, they see something, and that's it. If you actually compose text, you know, at the entrance, I hope you stopped at the entrance to Zoya's installation and read the text there. It took us longer to write that text than it did to get those 12 drawings here and install them. And, you know, if you haven't read it, go back and read it. And people, again, no pushback. If you're thoughtful in the language that you use, you get a thoughtful response and an appreciative response.
Maybe it is worth mentioning just one more sentence about reactions or objections. We had, as I said, we had a few issues, not during October 7th, because no one cares about an art school right now, and maybe rightly so, by the way, but before that, during that year, we had politicians mentioning art education and higher education at large in Israel, and more specifically Bezalel, because we are kind of a symbol, which I'm proud to be, or we are proud to be. And we had the Ministry of Finance saying that we don't have to finance or to budget art schools like Bezalel. These are artists that throw paint on the walls, okay? So this is the neighborhood, okay? This is what we have to fight with. And I do use the term fight because I think we are fighting for democracy, and we are fighting for the place, or the place of art, design, architecture, education in the country. And I think it's, from my point of view, the most important thing we do is education. It's much more, it's not a vocational school. We do train amazing architects or artists, but that's not, that it is important. But more importantly, it's training those young people who will be committed citizens, engaged, and more than anything, good human beings with good values. And if we do that, then we send agents of change into Israeli society that will be able to explain to our ministers why art and culture and education is important, and it's not just throwing paint on the walls.
And then you have to fast forward and have the privilege of looking back to see the new visual languages that emerge from times like this. So if you're creating foundational value systems and they then produce visual language that changes the landscape, over time, you understand that and appreciate it. You know, I said earlier about Dada and Surrealism after World War I, abstraction after World War II, figuration after, you know, the social movements after Vietnam. We don't know what will be produced now, but if you're stimulating a value system that will produce that work, this is all for the good. Another question?
Well, thank you. So in terms of Bezalel and just the larger community, is there still a meaningful distinction between what you call design and what you also mentioned very quietly, fine art?
Well, not quietly, I think, but there is a distinction. Well, it's a huge discussion, of course, and whether there's a distinction, there are many views or many ways to discuss this. I can perhaps give a few points of view. One would be that, well, maybe first I should say that Bezalel started with fine arts and crafts in the beginning of 20th century, with a lot of Judaica and craftsmanship in silversmithing and woodwork, etc. And safeguarding or securing and developing traditional crafts is super important for us. It's part of what we do. And in parallel to working in with the tech industry and the future, we care a lot about the past. The fine arts are not necessarily, of course, the past. They are the present and the future. The distinction, it's an interesting question, because from some perspectives I can draw the distinction. From others, we are trying to mix everything and to make students talk to each other, meet each other. Again, this goes back to the transparency of the campus. We want them to see what happens in different disciplines and be tempted to go into a sculpture studio or to the wood shop or to the whatever ceramics, the kilns, etc. So we're trying to encourage the meeting point and the multidisciplinary work. But back to your question, I do think that one of the ways to differentiate or to distinct the two would be the intention. I think a designer usually, not always, but usually works with a clear brief. There's a clear intention and there's a clear purpose to the design work, whereas an artist would, again, not always, but in most cases, will start. It's a personal work. There's no clear goal in the end. There's no clear intention when you start the work. So this might be one way to differentiate. I'm sure that James can add a few.
No.
More
I'm
than a
only
few.
going to say, well, one last question over there, but before, we'll save for our next talk this phenomenon of the blur of distinction among different mediums today. We're living in a time where you can't even say design here and fine art there, because there's a kind of continuum among the breadth of mediums available for work that we do.
Actually, only a very quick comment. If you look at Zoya's work up here, in many ways, in another context, I'm sorry for using the word context, but I will use it depends on the context. In many ways, in another context, you would think this is an illustration, not fine arts. But when shown here, and in this context, of course, it's an amazing piece of art.
You know, her grandpa she's from Kiev. Her grandpa was like a totally great painter, and she was academically trained in the Soviet Union. She was really trained in all mediums in the fine arts. And if you go back up and look again, part of what's so powerful is to see the use of colored pencil and the use of watercolor in the same work. And you see her classical training and her knowledge of modern art history, and it really helps make the work that much more powerful. But on the other hand, you can see it just as, graphic figuration, social realism, but it's all these things bundled together. Thank you for that point. Okay, last question.
Oh,
same neighborhood. What kind of cooperation is there among them rather than competition?
So it's a very good question. Again, it's the very beginning of us being in the city center, but our intention is to collaborate with everyone. It's not only those 3 or other 2 institutions which are very important, but there are quite a few others in the city center of Jerusalem, and I haven't mentioned it, but the historic building of Bezalel is in the city center as well. It's like 10 minutes walk from the new campus, and this is the architecture, Bezalel's architecture school. And what we are thinking of and actually starting to practice is a city campus, having different anchors in the city center, including our dorms. And we look at the list of cultural and educational institutions in the city center of Jerusalem. The cinema school, the theater school moved into the city center. The schools mentioned, Hadassah College and Musara and others. And I can't tell at this moment the things we did because we haven't done yet. It's too early. But our intention is to collaborate with everyone around and to make this scene flourish and become prominent. And it's really part of our vision, and I think it's something that Jerusalem needs. So hopefully, if we meet again in a year's time, I'll have better answers. But that's the clear intention.
okay.
Synergy is the future. And coming out of what we have been through now, it's that much more important. It's even what we were saying before about how the Palestinian community and the Israeli community in Jerusalem understand that they're in the same place at the same time. Last question.
Hi. Thank you for being here. Relatedly to the last question, Jerusalem is a very small and intense city where everyone is on top of each other, and I'm interested to know, this is all very new and happening in real time, but as the students come back from war and you have a mixed campus and they're dealing with PTSD and the very intense things they had to do while doing their army service, does Bezalel have any planned programming to support these students, or what's the environment like given that light? How are the different communities reacting to each other when they're physically in the same room and have to deal with each other in reality?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I'll just say first, it's important to mention that Jerusalem is not a small city. It's actually the largest in the country. Well, in American terms, it's a small city, but it's 1 million people living in Jerusalem. It's the largest, the poorest, the most difficult, contested, conflicted city. A beautiful city, wonderful. Back to the question, I can talk about this for an hour because there's so many different perspectives, but I will say that briefly that we do have many programs of supporting students coming back to school, whether they come back from the battlefield or Palestinians or others who are traumatized and need support and help, psychological help as well as emotional support. We were preparing a lot of programs beforehand, before coming back to school, mostly with the faculty to train them and to make them be able to cope with this. As you said, this is a super challenging situation. I mean, who can imagine a classroom where you have a student who just came back yesterday or a week ago from Gaza? He or she he was fighting in Gaza, and the guy or the girl sits next to him is a Palestinian who has his family in Gaza. And this is happening. It is happening. It's not a cliche. It's not a. It is happening. I didn't mention the percentage of Arab students. We have 10% Arab students at the school altogether, and it's not in every class, of course, because it's only 10%. But here and there, you find those situations. They are super challenging and difficult, but very generally speaking, it works. I'm not trying to say that there's no friction or no tension. There is, of course there is, but it's working, and thanks God, and hopefully we can move forward with more and more support, programs, helping everyone, and keeping this shared space, this so precious shared space, alive and thriving.
You know, this was a great question to conclude, because you remember we started by talking about the importance of restoring humanism. And this is just what Adi was describing now. So, Adi, I wanted... One last sentence from Adi before I thank you.
Go ahead. Oh, you want to thank me? Okay.
Yeah.
Just
so you
before
say-
that, I want to say that I've been thinking about how do you conclude such a talk, and as I said, I think I said before, I want to be hopeful. I want to be optimistic. It's not easy in Israel today. It's slightly better now than it was in the beginning, but nevertheless. And I thought about those English words that you used in English. You say, I want to portray the future, right? Or how do you depict your next steps, or how do you sketch or draw and it's all about drawing and painting and sketching and portraying, etc. And it's about us as artists, designers, architects who can imagine a different future for Israel, and I hope we will be able to do it. I hope the community, Bezalel, and other schools and other institutions and museums in Israel and perhaps here will all contribute to this hopeful wish.
So, Adi, I just want to end by thanking you and Tali and Dana for asking to do this evening here with us. We're happy to do this, and we'll do it again next year. And you know, synergy is the path to the future. And my last point, really, several times you were all talking about this little city of Jerusalem. Please, please. Bezalel is the center of the universe, and I'm sorry, Jerusalem is the center of the universe. Wait. Jerusalem is the center of the universe, and Bezalel sits at the center of Jerusalem.
Thank you very much. I said this before. I said it's a potential donor.